So thank you everyone for coming out to this session. I thought I'd give a little background on how this panel sort of came about and then let everyone introduce themselves. This panel is followed directly by a Tea for Teaching to provide an opportunity for more discussion. So this session will be more of a share out for the most part, and then we'll use that opportunity in the tea to actually have more of a conversation. So as the Associate Director of CEL, I'm part of a lot of different kinds of conversations on campus with faculty and various staff on campus. And I kept hearing conversations about things that students were disclosing to various people who were maybe not their faculty members about their experiences in the classroom, and realized there wasn't really a mechanism to share that information back out to faculty. So that's really the point of this session, is to give some of these folks an opportunity to share what some of their experiences have been with students, because a lot of the times that feedback would be helpful for us as faculty, and we just don't have an opportunity to kind of get it right in a concrete way. So I've asked each of them to share some of the kinds of things that students disclose to them about diversity and inclusion related topics, which I kind of indicated to all the panelists could be very broad. So whatever their particular position in relationship to that, that's what they'll share. So I think we should start with introductions, and then we can kind of go one by one to share out, if that seems all right to everyone on the
panel. Kate Wolf-Liga, I am the Director for Counseling Services here at the college.
Allison Peer, Student Academic Success Specialist in the Office of Learning Services. I work with a lot of students on academic probation.
Grace Maxon-Clark, and I'm an academic planning counselor for the EOP program, the Educational Opportunity Program.
I'm Patricia Clark. I'm an Associate Dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and also faculty in English and Creative Writing.
Paul, are you on this panel or not?
Is there a seat on the panel?
There's a seat right here. So do you want to kick off with some of your observations?
Sure, yeah. So I just want to share ahead of time, we're in a little bit of a weird position in the Counseling Services Center on campus, that a lot of the rules at the college either don't apply to us or only apply to us. So as mental health professionals that are licensed in New York State, we have certain things we can't report out. Just our responsibility for confidentiality is legal, and our careers depend on it. And obviously, it's the value of the profession. It's part of what gives us our gig. So, I just wanted to preface anything I say by saying that first. So, mandated reporting in terms of Title IX issues don't really apply to us. We certainly encourage students to report and make sure that they have access to the resources, but we also cannot breach their confidentiality unless we're in an imminent risk situation. So, like I said, I just wanted to kind of give some foundational information about that before I spoke. But some of the things that we've seen from students that when they've come to us with concerns about what they might have experienced in the classroom have had a pretty broad range. And as I say this, I also want to remind people this is not every student. I mean, these are just some of the things that we do receive feedback on. And I'm going to dilute it a little bit just to make sure nothing could get back to anybody in particular. But one of the things that has been expressed to me in the past in terms of a group that I had run for students who identified as LGBTQ+, was the use of preferred names. And so I realize now that the college has adopted a policy and has a mechanism for using preferred names associated with banner and some of those things, my hope is that will naturally evolve in the classroom. But I will say that we've had a number of students who've really had a hard time engaging, either engaging with their faculty member or engaging in the coursework because they felt that their personhood was negated somehow when they've asked to be referred to a certain way and they haven't been. I think there's just something very invalidating about it. And for many students, they adapt to it and move through it. And for many students, it can be a mechanism for them to choose to disengage. So I wanted to mention that. I wanted to mention that we have had a handful of experiences over the years where counselors have been on the receiving end of information about students who have been sexually harassed by the professor in the classroom. So, you know, again, this is kind of where that Title IX mandated reporting thing. That Title IX mandated reporting thing is a little different for us. That they're, you know, our hands were a little tied, but I think, you know, we've had a range of experiences, and I think some of the feedback that I've received from the counselors has been that they can see that perhaps the faculty member didn't necessarily recognize, and it might not have been an intentional incident toward the student, you know, where the student was on the receiving end, that it may have been an ignorance kind of based interaction. And so one of the things that I think I just wanted to make sure that I could express associated with that is just a reminder about training and kind of checking ourselves, and maybe, you know, hopefully establishing relationships with our colleagues, so when we notice something, we can kind of give them a little nudge and remind them that, you know, someone might have an experience of this a little differently than perhaps you intended, and just reminding people of some of those things. And then a lot of the issues that we get feedback on related to race and ethnicity, and perhaps, you know, other aspects of culture, have a lot of them end up boiling down to things like pronunciation of names. You know, just the investment in time and effort in pronouncing somebody's name right, I think can go a long way. And so students, again, it's that validation of experience that, okay, I expressed to you that my name is this, and you've said, oh, I'm just gonna call you, you know, Joe, because it's short for whatever it is. That's not my name. It's pretty invalidating to me. So I think those are some of the things that I would just, you know, I just wanted to share, that the students are providing feedback to us. I think other things related to race and ethnicity that we might have seen a little bit of over time, times a lot of, can be experienced right in the curriculum. And so I think, you know, this is another area where, and I want to be careful about what I say about this, this is another area where I think if folks can be attentive and perhaps use a colleague to work with them to review their syllabus and their curriculum that's planned, they can maybe avoid situations where there's cultural appropriation being experienced by a student. And I can try to talk a little bit more about it if anybody has questions later, but I do want to be a little careful, and I want to be conscientious of time, but I want to be a little careful not to share too much, because sometimes it can reveal a little bit about where it's coming from.
I'm Allison from OLS, and I said before, I worked with a lot of students on academic probation. A lot of the students I work with, you know, they're struggling because of the adjustments in college. There's a lot of different things to adjust to, a lot more independence and, you know, a higher level of work. Some of the students I work with experience some extra struggle due to a disability that they have. It could be, you know, a learning disability that they were diagnosed with since they were young, or it might be something that some signs and symptoms are just, you know, starting to bubble up now because of, you know, the more difficult nature of the work, and also increased anxiety with being away from home and being at college. So I wanted to talk about diversity and inclusion as it relates to being sensitive to different students' needs. So we have a good relationship with the Office of Disability Support Services. A lot of times, Alicia and I will find ourselves walking students down to Pat and Star's office to introduce the student, help them start a conversation, feel comfortable down there. Some students are already used to using accommodations because they've done so throughout their K through 12 years. some students are hesitant to start that process, perhaps because they haven't had to seek accommodations before, or they wanted to, start college and try it without the accommodations and see how they could do. Sometimes they think, well, maybe I matured out of it. So I think it's important to remember that some students are, hesitant to even register with disability support services. Some students, register but are hesitant to use their accommodations as much as they could. Sometimes they don't want to use the accommodation if it requires them to leave the classroom, because then other students see them leaving the classroom. So I had a student share with me, she has a lot of anxiety. A lot of students talk to us about their anxiety, some test anxiety and other kinds of anxiety as well. So she was in the process of getting registered with Disability Support Services, getting the documentation she needed to make her accommodations official. And she didn't have her paperwork all in place yet, but she was going to be receiving extended time on tests, and she was taking a test. It was the very end of the test. All the other students had left, and she told me that she just stayed like 1 minute later to finish up the test, and she felt very offended because the professor made a comment to her, and I wasn't there, so I don't know the exact tone of the comment. The way she relayed it to me, she felt like she was being made fun of for needing extra time. I just think it's important, to keep students' differing needs in mind, and keep in mind that, they are already sometimes hesitant to talk about their disabilities and use their accommodations. So any comment that could be construed, or misinterpreted in a negative way, it may make the student, even more hesitant to talk to the instructor about what their needs are, or to feel comfortable using their accommodations. I had another student who, she did officially register. She got her letters to give to her instructors, and one of her instructors said to her, "Oh, well, it's just a quiz. Let's try it and see how you do. And then if you need your accommodations, the next time you can use them, but just take it here for now." And that student, when it happened, she wasn't getting the, accommodations that she's legally entitled to, but she didn't have the confidence to really stand up for herself at that point and explain to the professor, "No, I really am entitled to this." That's another thing we work on with students, is helping them advocate for themselves.
Thank you, Allison. So I think that's a good segue, because a lot of what our EOP program does, and a lot of the role of the APC, our academic planning counselor, is to work with the students in learning how to advocate for themselves. So our program, predominantly our students are first generation. All of them are low income, and majority of them are students of color. And so a lot of the issues that we see on a daily basis kind of revolve around those issues. I have a number of examples just off of the top of my head, but I think it's really important that we remember that the students are, especially students that are coming from urban areas, which is another kind of demographic of our students. It's a complete culture shock to come to Oswego, New York, and then to come to college. And so I think that that's, one of the things I'm working on is coming up with a survey for our students, just to prepare our students better, is really understanding how comfortable they feel in our community. When they go to, say it's a student of color and they're going to Walmart and they see, 3 Confederate flags on the way, how does that play a role in their experience here at SUNY Oswego? And so some of the things that have come up, students feeling like they're getting different grades from their other students who are white. And sometimes it's, they're in the same group and they did the same work, they submitted the same assignment, and yet they have different grades. Students called out in class I had a student in particular who was called out for not speaking up, and I think I've shared this before, through Starfish. She was Starfished because she was not speaking up. But then in person, the professor said, well, why aren't you talking more in class? So there's these kind of mixed signals, kind of targeted, I would say, attacks towards the student. A lot of the time, students feel like they're not supported, especially around controversial topics, especially with the recent election. Students, appreciate the fact that things are being brought up in class, but then when it comes down to it, they don't feel supported with their perspective or with their experience. And also students, on the flip side, sometimes students feel like they're exploited within their department. So they are the token Black kid or the token Hispanic student that's doing really well, so we need to put them out front and say, wow, look how great this Black student is to be in our program. So that's just a few, but I think it's a good example.
Thank you, Grace.
Yeah.
Just to sort of tie into some of the things that Grace has said, as a ostensible Black faculty, I often get students knocking down my door, saying, hey, this, that, or the other has happened. And what's interesting is that they disclose things that are not readily apparent in the classroom. For example, while a good majority of the students of color are EOP, there are also a percentage of students of color who are not EOP students. And so this demographic gets missed. And so what I get sometimes are, hey, this professor thinks that I, lived in a single parented household and, we were impoverished when in fact, I grew up, upper middle class. My parents are professionals, and this professor has no inkling how to talk to me, in light of, my class position, because, I'm Black and, he or she brings these assumptions. How do I negotiate this? What do I do? So, it brings forth a really interesting set of, considerations that, faculty, and I think, perhaps even faculty should, begin to, if they have not had conversations with students about, and I'm sure you've heard this term, intersectionality, where you have students who occupy different, social and cultural positions, and they're not just one thing. You have, again, Black students who are middle class, you have Black students who are queer, you have Black students who are not entirely Black, and they identify in very different ways. And so we have to, sort of check our assumptions at the door. And again, I think these are some of the problems that, we sort of bring a lot, of knowledge in terms of, and some of us are sort of bolstered by, some of these terms that give us a sense of knowingness and empowerment, terms like implicit bias and microaggressions, and we use these terms to identify some of these behaviors, but they still beg solutions and strategies for mitigating these behaviors. So it's not just about, this microaggression is happening in my classroom, but it's like, what are you doing actively to, mitigate it? And so, I have, of course, some ideas. I really advocate having students tell their stories, just shut up and listen. As professors, we love to talk and we love to say what we know. And again, throw out these labels, oh, blah, blah, blah is happening to you because blah, 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 this study. I think we can learn a lot from our students by just letting them talk because they can reveal so much to us. And in terms of, what we can do college-wise, we recently created, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, on the Diversity and Inclusion website, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. There's a strategic plan, and there are actually goals that are set for addressing some diversity issues. You know, how these can be enacted in our curriculum, you know, remains the challenge, but I think that might be a starting place.
So I'm really glad that you brought up intersectionality, because I actually had just written down that if anybody is just kind of looking for something else to engage in, just for your own reference and to be thinking about things differently, and you're not as familiar with some of that stuff, Kimberly Crenshaw, I think, is responsible for coining the term.
Yes.
And she's got a really good YouTube video. She got a few, I think, but one of them, it might be called intersectionality, but if it's not, it's Say Her Name. And so she talks a fair amount about her work in that. And actually another thing that you brought up that I really liked was sometimes there's this elitism in social justice work, I think, that happens, and it's very off-putting to a lot of people. So one of the things that I think probably happens to faculty members and staff members on campus is, if this isn't the work that you are often engaged in, when you have a colleague who starts talking about it and they're very engaged and they're very active and perhaps defensive about some of their own biases, a lot of times I think an elitism is expressed through the work that they're doing. And that, again, that can be really off-putting to a lot of people. So I think my assumption is that anybody who's here today is either just genuinely interested or already kind of engaged in being aware and focusing on social justice issues. And so I think that's just a good reminder for all of us that I think we can make better gains with our colleagues and helping to influence them if we can make sure we're also checking some of that stuff. And then one other thing I just thought I would mention that ties a little bit in with some of the class issues and experiences that people had is, because this one I feel like I can talk about because it wasn't inherent to my role in counseling. When we started the campus food pantry, which is downstairs, we had requested donations towards the end of the semester because our supply at counseling the counselors had done this for years and just kind of offered it for counseling students and anybody who's referred by health services. The supply was pretty well depleted at the end of this particular semester. So I think it was probably in 2015, right after I started. So we had put out a request for donations, and it was wonderful. The donations came in and there was a lot of interest, which was great. But I did get some direct emails from folks, and then there were some, I think, email replies to like a do not respond email that got forwarded to me from alumni, from emeriti faculty members, from current faculty members, from other staff members. So all sorts of stakeholders on campus with questions like, or comments like, students need to stop using their food money on beer to party every night. Or could this really be an issue? Are we sure that this is a true concern? And while I recognize where some of the ignorance about this being a real thing could have come from, I accept that people sometimes just don't know, so they're a little incredulous that this is an issue. I think one of the things that I just wanted to share related to that is that one of the great things that I think this highlights is that college has become more accessible for people that it didn't used to be as accessible for. That's great. But the institution, and I'm not specifically calling out SUNY Oswego, I think higher education has really struggled to continue to offer students services to retain students who are coming from other socioeconomic backgrounds or just other aspects of identity and culture that maybe traditionally couldn't access higher ed. So those are some of the challenges that we're just looking to, we're trying to plug the drain a little bit for the meantime. And I think there's more things that need to be done institutionally to attend to these issues. But for now, these are some of the ways that we handle it. So I think if you hear of a colleague, or maybe even have that question for yourself about, is this really a need? Is this really a thing? Some service that might be offered on campus, maybe really ask yourself, well, what need is it filling? Why is this a new need where maybe it wasn't before?
On a related note, I have some students who are facing additional struggles because they don't have all of the money they need at the beginning of the semester to get the books they need for their classes. So they have to decide, well, which books do I really need now? Which ones can I wait on? And some of them end up digging themselves into a hole because they've missed a whole bunch of assignments. And they, you know, if this is their first semester in college, they don't really realize that it is a big deal to miss those assignments, because in high school, perhaps they could just catch up and their teachers would give them extra time. But I do think it's a real issue for a lot of students, and there are definitely professors who are working on using open educational resources to help lower the cost of resources, you know, books for their students. And then, you know, some books are available on reserve, but I wonder what other ideas people have for helping students get books that can afford them in, you know, like non-traditional ways, I guess, to get resources. Maybe we could discuss it further afterwards.
I have bought books for students.
Mhm.
If they were really in dire straits, just reach to my pocket and buy the books.
And just,
I'm an adjunct, that's not happening.
just going back to course reserves, as a librarian, I would love to see more faculty utilize course reserves. I for the life of me, I don't know why all courses don't have material, one copy of the required text or material on course reserve. Why? That's my question. Why not?
One of the things with students in our program, we've learned that student accounts really is there to help students. And so sometimes you can work it out with student accounts that they can manipulate a loan or manipulate some type of funding source that the student already has to kind of add some money in their pocket to help cover the cost. If reserves aren't an option, if other things aren't an option, sometimes that can work.
What did you call that?
Course reserves.
Is that in the library? Is that
Yeah, it's in the
okay.
library. And usually the liaison for each department will send out at the beginning of the semester, we have the service, we will help you put material on reserve if it's not so easy. So I would just like to see more faculty utilize it.
What's amazing is like once it's on reserve, you just discuss the same books, it just like magically is on reserve the next semester. It's amazing.
Well, my publishers, well, I got 3 copies of my book for last term, and I was like, what am I gonna, why do I need all that? Yeah, so. Now I know what to do with it.
Another thing is when people, when there's updated editions, like, I guess thinking about whether you need to get the most recent edition or not, if students don't need to get the most recent edition, or if the editions are essentially, like any of them would work, maybe letting them know that. Sometimes the older ones are cheaper. Sometimes we might have some of the older ones at the library and we don't have the newest one. So like if I've had people come and ask, do you have this edition of this textbook? And I'm looking it up and I'm like, well, we have this older edition and I don't know if it works for them or not. So just thinking about editions and letting them know if they do definitely need a specific edition or if other ones will work. That can be helpful as well.
One of the things we've run into is the what is it, for the online courses, they need to have a $100 account fee for, you know, my math lab or my IT lab, and you can't really share those with somebody or get them on reserve, and so that's really increasing students' demand for cash at the beginning of the semester because they can't start those assignments until they have, and sometimes there's a 14-day like trial run, but even then they still have to buy it after the fact, and that really hinders some of our students' ability to purchase their books because they're paying for these additional fees.
So we have 2 programs going on looking at the cost of materials. One is open educational resources. And over the last year, we've been giving grants of between $750 and $1,500 to instructors and faculty that will go and create the open educational resources for their class, depending what they want to do. And so far, we probably have about 8 faculty who have gotten involved in the program. That really helps students. And then the other one is Digital Direct Access, which is a program where instructors can choose to, in essence, require 100% of their students to have digital materials and then the materials are presented to the student inside Blackboard on the first day of class, and then the university charges the students and then pays back the bookstore who gets the bill. Now, generally when we go into the digital materials, it depends. When you have like those MyLabs, the savings when we go and order in that way is sometimes more around 20% of what they would do. But in some of the other instances, you're looking at the cost of the materials are about 50 to 60% of what they were before. And this semester, I think we'll have about 40 different sections using digital direct access.
What was the first one you mentioned?
Open Educational Resources, OER, which is, in a sense, materials that use existing.
Right.
I also would put in that we have a librarian, Laura Harris, who does a lot of work with open educational resources, and I'm sure would be happy to work with anyone who is trying to find something to use in their class or wants to know more about it. She would sit down with people and talk more about it.
So it continues to have workshops and things on OERs, and we'll continue. Yeah. I think Paul has something to say. There was a great podcast recently on that.
I think my point for that was covered, but I wanted to come back to what Allison was talking about with students taking tests at the Disability Support Services office. One thing so if you have a student who has an 8 a.m. class and a 9-10 class, and they have a dispensation for double time or time and a half for an exam for the 8 o'clock class, they're able to then start the exam early and get done with the exam in time to go to their next class. The student has an 8 o'clock class, a 9-10 class, and a 10-20 class. Then one of the classes, either before or after, is going to have to deal with the fact that that student isn't going to make it to class on time when the 9-10 class has an exam, because the student, if they have time and a half, they're either going to start it during the time of the earlier class, or they're going to extend into the time of the later class. And this is something that the DSS office will come to the faculty who are involved and ask them, I have a student who has this situation, would you be willing to be flexible? And surprisingly enough, there are some faculty who say, no, not my class. Have the student leave the other class. So just so that you know, if you're one of those faculty who gets asked this, it's not something that is done to try to give the student an advantage. It's not something that's done to try to game the system in any way. This is just a reality of the fact that students frequently have classes that are blocked together, and if they have extra time for the exam, it's a federally mandated thing. So it's going to have an impact on somebody else's class, and we, as a community, have to deal with that.
My experience has been that I provide the task to the office, DSS, and the student contacts them and they schedule it whatever's convenient for the student. I mean, I guess that would be unless I have a problem with that, but they can take it whenever they want as far as I'm concerned.
So under most circumstances, they're taking it at the same exact time as everyone else. And there are some instructors who are very picky about the start time. They don't want a student to start before the rest of the class. But you can have reassurance in those cases that the student is not going to be able to communicate. They're not going to be able to test and then text someone, oh, question 1 is this. Once they start the exam, they're stuck for the period of time without access to the outside world. So it is a secure situation. It's not something that compromises the integrity of the exam. And I find it dumbfounding that there are instructors who will contribute to student anxiety.
Making it more difficult for them, yeah.
The student pays the price for this.
And one thing I'll just point out, just in case folks weren't aware, Disability Services has changed its name to the Office of Accessibility Resources now. So, so you'll start to see that.
It's not officially changed on any documents online.
Okay, yeah, so that'll be coming at least, but accessibility resources you might hear as the term, and that's referring to the same office.
So Allison, you mentioned that your professor made it, or it's not okay to say, try to do the quiz first time. What if the student says that's how they usually do it, or they prefer to? So I had a student last term that said, what I like to do is try the first test in class. If I need more time, then I'll make arrangements the next time. Is that okay?
It's up to the student whether they want to use
It's up to
their
the student.
accommodation.
And most students in those situations are genuine, and if they really don't need it, they'll identify and say, it's a hassle for me to do this, I'm just going to take it in class, I don't need it.
Right.
There are occasional students who will, after taking it in class, attempt to sort of revise history and say, well, I really should have taken that at BSS, can I ever read you? And in that case, you are very professional to do that. As long as they make the decision, then they will make the decision. When the instructor tries to make the decision for the student,
You know, one thing I recognize too is that we definitely do have students who try to game the system. I will tell you, I really do think for the most part it's an outlier. There are some things that I see that makes it feel like it's not an outlier because of some things I have to interface with. But for the most part, it is an outlier. But I do accept the reality that we do have a lot of students who will take advantage of things that are created to level the playing field for people who need it, and students look to gain an advantage and really exploit some level of privilege. So, you know, when we're talking about social justice issues, these are some of the things that we do see come up periodically, but I feel relatively confident saying that those are outliers, but they happen.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more. I've had conversations with you about more related to like class issues. You talk a little bit more about some of the experiences that students talk about related to that. Because I think when we think about diversity and inclusion, we might jump to think about race, we might jump to think about gender, we might jump to think about disability. But I think the class issue comes up a lot in our classes and we don't realize it.
I don't have a ton of examples to really draw upon of what students have said, but I think it's important to suspend judgment with the way that students communicate with us. When students are coming from poverty, generally, you know, their language is less formal, you know, smaller vocabulary, their literacy experiences are more limited. So they may not be at the same level as with communicating as far as like professionalism with emails or conversations, just because, you know, the environment that they grew up in didn't give them the practice of the formal language skills the same way that like you know, middle class or a wealth environment would have. So like sometimes I think faculty and staff might look at an email that seems to be unprofessional as a sign of disrespect, that, well, the student didn't take their time to, you know, say it in a more professional way. But while it may be true that they didn't go back and proofread, or part of it may be that they just don't have, you know, as formal language skills as some other people.
This, when you were talking earlier, Grace, and this conversation gives rise to this dilemma that I'm presently in. And I thought I had dealt with it, but now I'm wondering if maybe I hadn't. I had a student last spring, and she, you know, she's an African-American young lady. She didn't seem to take the class seriously. She had quite a few absences, but I really liked her, and she was really sweet, and she, you know, added to when she was at class, she added to it, and I don't know what her socioeconomic blah, blah, blah. So anyway, she contacted me a few weeks ago and asked me if I would, she said she didn't go into it all in detail, but she said that basically she had been asked to leave the college, the university, and she was trying to get back in, and she wondered if I would write her a recommendation, or, you know, some sort of a recommendation to get back in. So I put it kind of back on her to tell me what she thinks her assets are, why, you know, and generate this, thinking that she would take more ownership if she had, you know, done it or whatever. I don't know. I didn't know what to say because I couldn't. So anyway, I was hoping she would kind of give me the starting point, and then I said I would kind of add to it, or, you know, change what I felt needed to be changed, and have her do some of the work in order to get herself back into school. So I don't know. I don't know if I handled that the right way, and now I'm trying to being forced to be more sensitive to perhaps her situation a little bit.
Well, I think one of the things that you did do that is laudable is that you actually had a conversation with her and you know, ask her to think about what she felt were, you know, compelling reasons why she should be admitted back into the college. And so it forced her, you know, to kind of reckon with, you know, some things that she probably hadn't reckoned with, that put her in a situation to begin with. And so, you know, the lesson of responsibility knows no color or no social economic background. And so, again, I think here's where, you know, things get kind of, you allow me to say, funky, when people think that, you know, I can't say this to this person because, you know, how are they going to take it? You know, I'm a white person telling this black student to do blah, 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 blah. But I think, again, if, you know, if you're attentive to what the student needs on a very basic level, you can deliver that as a, you know, faculty. And I think that that's the crowning lesson. Just to answer the other question more that you responded to, on the flip side, again, the population of students that I encountered who are students of color, not EOP, they're really, you know, sort of invisible in many respects in a lot of these classrooms. And so what they encounter is, you know, this assumption of, you know, the default assumption that, you know, you grew up in a, you know, hardscrabble urban environment, you know, one-parented household and, you know, impoverished and that sort of thing. And I don't think that it's, you know, an assumption that is intentional, but, you know, to use the, you know, current term, an implicit bias, you know, that implicit bias pops up more often than we would want to admit. And so, again, I think, you know, just to the lessons that I've learned in the classroom, you know, to put my own implicit biases in check, you know, just shut up and listen. It really works just to have sit down and have a conversation with students. I can't tell you how valuable that is, you know, just to cast your assumptions aside, you know, ask the student to come during your office hours, you know, let's sit down and talk about, you know, what's going on, you know, even before you get to the specific problem, maybe an assignment that a student is having difficulties with, there might be some backstory that the student might share, you know, in talking. Again, this is not about, you know, getting students to disclose information that they don't necessarily need to disclose, but, you know, often just having a conversation, you find a lot of, you know, things about the student that will help you be able to effectively then help the student do the work that he or she needs to get done in the classroom.
And, you know, I know not everybody would be comfortable with this, but for those who think they might or jump outside of their comfort zone, I mean, I think and I know, Pat, you kind of got to this, but the educational opportunity for a student to give them feedback about wow, so I got this email from you the other day, and I would just encourage you to think about who you're emailing. You know, there's an inherent position of power. I'm in an evaluative position with you. And while, you know, I enjoy having a relationship with you, I do want to let you know that other people may not appreciate an informal tone like this. I mean, I think it's just a good educational opportunity. And, you know, certainly we don't need to globalize those things, but I think if you have expectations about that, it's just a good learning opportunity for people to know that there's different expectations and different roles and stuff like that. I think the other thing, just to mention, if anybody's interested, the Implicit Association test, I think it's the IA2, is available for free. And I'll just share with you, I don't remember who hosts it, but it's kind of the best measure. Oh, great. It's kind of the best measure we have available to us in social psych. What? Harvard? Thank you. You know, I mean, certainly stuff is correlational, but it's kind of the best we got available. And I had a colleague who recently came to me and had wanted to do some work with their staff team, and they had said, you know, what ideas do you have for assessment to kind of give people some feedback about where they're at? And I said, take the Implicit Association test. So the colleague did, and they were incredibly disappointed with the responses. And I said, don't overthink what it is. It's a feedback mechanism. You work really hard to behave differently than you were conditioned to behave growing up. It doesn't mean that that all goes away. It just means that, you know, hopefully it doesn't come out the first second. It's something that you know, something else kicks in before you respond in a certain way, or before that bias causes you to behave in a certain way. So it's just a kind of a nice tool. I haven't taken it in years, and I should take it again because I think it would be good for me to do too. But, you know, I think the other thing I just want to mention is that in student affairs, we've been doing just once a month at this point, like learning lunches, and we've been doing them around DE&I issues. And so this last semester, our series was socioeconomic status and poverty, and some of the challenges, because we need to better educate ourselves and how we're interacting with students, either through student employment situations, or because, you know, in counseling, they're our clientele, or, you know, whatever that kind of interaction and transaction is that we have with them. So if that's something that anybody's interested in, feel free to contact me, and, you know, we can kind of give you the information about what we're going to do this semester. Because for us, it's just an opportunity. I mean, I'm recognizing things that I do or say or think all the time, and I'm like, damn it. You know, I thought I was beyond this place, and there is no beyond anything. There's no destination, in my opinion. I will constantly be learning and reassessing, reevaluating my own biases and some of those things. So for us, it's just really good. You know, it's just a group of people who've chosen to come together and have conversations so we can learn better.
I'll just plug to the Blind Spot, which is the book that Project Implicit is based on, will be the self-reading group in the fall.
Oh, yay.
I'd also put in a plug for the mental health first aid training that they've been repeating, and the safe zone trainings that Lifestyles does. I've gone through both of those, and I found them both helpful.
Yes, and so Safe Zone, you can contact, there's a few people on campus you can contact, but I think it's easiest to contact the Lifestyle Center on campus. Shelley Sloan does some of the coordination. I think, Sharona, is there anybody else that you know of that we can?
That's who we talked to.
Okay, so they'll do it for departments. They'll, you know, I mean, they'll gather trainers available for that. In addition, the mental health first aid training, the next one we're going to have, we'll be posting soon, but that is May 16th. So it'll be a full day training on May 16th.
So I'd encourage everyone, if you want to talk about these issues more and like do some troubleshooting for classroom situations, I think the T for Teaching following this is perfect for those sorts of things. So that starts at 3 o'clock in 123 Penfield.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you so much for